Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Dear participants, welcome to the third side event of the series Youth in Capacity Building, organized by the PCCB, the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, in collaboration with the PCCB Network, and these virtual thematic sessions of the Africa Climate Week. My name is Alejandro Kilpatrick. I'm leading the Capacity Building Subdivision at the Climate Change Secretariat, and I will be having the pleasure to moderate this session today. Through this side event at the Africa Climate Week, we'll be exploring the role of youth and their capacities in enhancing resilience for NDC implementation and other national development plans. Before I introduce our panelists, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Richard Lungumufumo, who's a member of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, to deliver some opening remarks. Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alejandro, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. Dear participants, let me take this opportunity to welcome you to the third side event of the series Youth in Capacity Building, organized by the Paris Committee on Capacity Building in collaboration with the PCCB Network at the virtual thematic session of the African Climate Week. I am Richard Lungu, representing the PCCB, and indeed on behalf of the PCCB, I would like to welcome you all to this side event that will provide a platform for regional collaboration, regional dialogue, and to promote effective resilience building among African young people at local, national, and regional levels in Africa. As you all know, this particular side event is aligned with the thematic track, integrated approaches for climate resilience development of the virtual thematic session of the African Climate Week. And this event seeks to encourage practical discussion at the regional level around solutions for adaptation and resilience building. From the planning to implementation of the nationally determined contribution and the Sustainable Development Goals, Sdgs, youth have a critical role to play as agents of change. Recognizing the transformational role of youth at this side event, we seek to utilize the diverse experience of our esteemed panelists, which I know that we have capable panelists, in order to explore the role of youth and their capacities in enhancing resilience for nationally determined contribution implementation and national development plans. As you all know, the PCCB theme for 2021 is building capacity to facilitate a coherent implementation of NDC in the context of National Development Plan. Through this side event, which is the third in the series, the PCCB aims to promote meaningful youth engagement in building capacities for enhancing resilience building in the context of the Paris Agreement implementation and SDGs in the African region. I know very well that we have very experienced panelists who have been assembled before us to actually present to us their views and perspective on various aspects relating to youth and the implementation of the NDC in the context of national development plans. Before we begin, let me, on behalf of the PCCB, thank you, thank all the participants and let me read again. On behalf of the PCCB, I would like to thank all the panelists and the participants for accepting our invitation, and we are looking forward to being inspired and enriched by your experience. At this moment, Let me now give the floor back to Ariando to moderate the proceedings. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Richard, for setting the scene and highlighting the role of youth in building capacities. And as you mentioned, we have a very distinguished panel. So we will now proceed with the rest of the session, which will have a regional panel discussion, and we'll have the opportunity to have questions and answer session with the audience. We're going to use a tool called Padlet for everyone to write in questions or comments, and the link to this tool would be put in the chat shortly. So I'll ask my colleagues to kindly put the link to the Padlet in the chat so that everyone can access it. You just click on the link and it will take you to the tool. Just a suggestion, try to use a browser different to Internet Explorer, and that will help you use better the tool. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our distinguished panelists. So we have four panelists, and we have Anthony Okeyo, who's the founder and executive director of Pearl Native Youth Network Africa. Welcome, Anthony. We also have Elizabeth Gulugulu, who's the program manager for the African Youth Initiative on Climate Change from Zimbabwe. Welcome, Elizabeth. We also have Edikiti Ochiengo-Tieno, who's renewable energy specialist, CIST Africa, and co-founder of Ecolution. Welcome, Edikiti. And we also have the pleasure of having Lee Koban, who's an education and capacity development portfolio manager with the Africa Climate and Development Institute in the University of Cape Town. Welcome, Lee. It is then with great pleasure to welcome all our panelists. But before we get started, I would like to present you a bit of the netiquette for today's meeting and how to use the platforms that would facilitate our discussion. Like I mentioned before, you can use the Padlet tool, and the chat is already, the link is already in the chat. So I would like to ask everyone to please keep your microphone muted and your camera off at all times. We will be using an online tool, also Mentimeter, called Mentimeter, to interact with our audience. Please head over to menti.com and enter the code that you will see in the chat. So you will see the link to this tool called Menti and its corresponding code in the chat. It is advisable to use your phone or a separate device to connect to this platform so you can use the tool with minimum disruption to your meeting participation. Again, like I mentioned, the code and the link to Menti can be also found on the chat. So after having said that, let's open the floor now to the panelists and kickstart today's discussion in order to set the context. We will now begin with a first question, and the audience will also have a chance to answer this question. So we'll be asking the panelists, but also the audience using the Mentimeter tool. So the first question for our panelists and the audience is, are youth capacity builders or recipients, or both? So like I mentioned, audience can also take part in this question by heading over to Menti, and the code is in the chat. The code is 91662774. So I will be asking this question to all panelists, but I will ask you for a very brief response just to kickstart the discussion. So again, the question is, are youth capacity builders or recipients, or both? So first, I would like to ask Anthony to answer very briefly in around 1 minute or 2 minutes maximum. What do you think? Are youth capacity builders or recipients, or both? Anthony, over to you.
Thank you so much, Alejandro. Thank you for welcoming us. Thank you for putting up a wonderful session for all of us. In my view, in my own opinion, given the number of times I've spent working with the youth, also me myself, I'm a youth. I find youth are both capacity builders and recipient. How do I come up to this? Most of the things that I actually got to put my hands on was really through peer learning. I had to do a lot of educating myself, looking for a lot of online resources that I think also helped build my capacity, like the UN Learning Hub, Climate Learning Hub, that has really played a tremendous role. But also at the same time, during the time that I was working with the youth, like in 2019 when we were working on biodiversity restoration and conservation, I got to realize that there were so many things that my fellow youth at the indigenous level also had, and I actually had no idea about. I got to learn about the importance of other herbs. I got to even learn about other good practices that were done back then in before our time. So to me, really, youth are both capacity builders, and at the same time, they're also recipient. It also just depends on what time it is and what knowledge they have to apply in certain aspects, but they're whole capacity builders and recipient. In the interest of time, I would want to keep it here, and we continue the discussion later. Thank you, Alejandro.
Thank you very much, Anthony. So I'll now move over to Elizabeth to answer the same question. Are youth capacity buildings or recipients or both? And we are seeing in the screen what the audience is thinking also about this question. Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you so much for the platform. I would also want to concur with the previous speaker that young people are recipients and are also capacity builders. The reason why I'm saying this is, and speaking this from experience, from the period of 2015 to 2019, our government took it in their hands to capacitate young people on what the intended nationally determined contributions are. And from that time, we're being capacitated. We didn't even know what NDCs are and what NDCs are. Then we have a project that was supported by the UNCCLN, which required young people to offer capacity to other young people in the rural communities. And we could only do that because we were capacitated technically and we were capacitated financially. So you find out that young people, they play a pivotal role by governments, NGOs, relevant stakeholders trying to cover or minimize the knowledge gap, making sure that young people are resilient and they know what they should do when it comes to climate-related issues. Young people are also taking it in their own hands to make sure that they disseminate this information, they share this information with their peers so that at the end, they can adapt to the effects of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for giving all those examples to answer the question that there are actually both. But let's now hear from Edikite. Again, are youth capacity buildings or recipients or both? Maybe if you can tell us in less than 2 minutes. Edikite, over to you.
Okay, thank you again for giving me this opportunity. I will say that you, as you begin your journey as a climate ambassador, you are a recipient. Then you are capacitated. You're given the ability and the knowledge and the power now to also empower others. So as you begin, you are capacitated, and as you grow into it and you understand the dynamics around it, you now become the capacity builders. So on my side, I think youth are both capacity builders and recipients at specific point and times in their journey.
Thank you very much, Edikite. And then now over to Lee, if you can answer also the question.
Yeah, I think like as we're seeing, there's quite a lot of feeling that youth are both capacity builders and recipients. And I think that feeling is reflected in the shift that we're seeing within the education space away from teacher-centric teaching towards student-centered learning. I think Anthony mentioned peer learning and social learning, where we look at youth as active knowledge holders whose perspectives and skills and values and agency are all important for building the capacity of both older and younger and their own generation. So, for example, youth have a very different relationship to technology, to media, to arts, to culture than the older generations. And those are all incredibly powerful tools in the fight as we move forward against the climate challenge that we face. And I just also wanted to end that youth perspective of living into a climate changed world is a very valuable perspective, where older generations can learn from what youth are feeling in their bodies in terms of the gravitas of living into a future where their bodies will experience extremes that we haven't seen before. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lee, and all our panelists for that very insightful introduction to the topic. And we can see from the Mentimeter that there's a broad agreement, as with our panelists, that youth are both capacity buildings and recipients. But I really like how Edikiti mentioned that at some point that they start as recipients, and then when they're empowered, they become capacity builders themselves. So thank you very much. So now we're moving a bit into discussing the topic of how to integrate resilience into development policies and programs, and to lead into the coherent implementation of NDCs and the Sdgs, which is the focus area of the PCCB. So here, I would like to ask from two of our panelists the following question. So, how can the integration of resilience into development policies and programs lead to the coherent implementation of the NDCs and the Sdgs? So I will like to ask first Elizabeth to give us her views on this, and then Lee to also share her insights. So Elizabeth, over to you.
Okay, I've been having some technical challenges, but let me try to respond to the question: how can the integration of resilience into development policies and programs lead to the coherence of the implementation of the NDCs? So in most developing countries, you realize that because we are vulnerable, we are referred to as vulnerable, we are still trying to build our capacities. Most NDCs, they are not only focusing on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but we have come to a point of realizing that in as much as we need to stick within 1.5, in as much as we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and meet our targets, it is also important for us to ensure and make sure that our communities are resilient to the effects of climate change. Example, Cyclone Idai, which affected Mozambique, Malawi, and part of Zimbabwe 2 years back, the droughts that are constantly reoccurring in the southern parts of Africa and other African countries. If we say we are going to apply climate smart agriculture as a way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we should also play a role in making sure that, number one, those people have food security. Number two, those people have water security. Number three, those people can at least adapt to the effects of climate change, making sure that we have strong infrastructure that will not affect their health, that will not affect or contribute to people dying due to the effects of climate change. So we need to understand that resilience plays a critical role when it comes to our NDCs, to the formulation of NDCs. And of course, we cannot talk about NDCs without highlighting on the importance of the Sdgs. I talked about water. I talked about Goal 13, which is taking urgent action on climate change. I talked about making sure that we reduce hunger, we reduce poverty. So all these issues are all interlinked. And it is important that as we are now trying to implement the NDCs starting from next year, it is important to make sure that there is need for Goal 17. We need access to resources to adapt. We need access of resources to mitigate. And by having those accesses, there is need for partnership, which is Goal 17. So you find out that all these issues, the international strategies, the laws, etc., when we are so much strategic as governments, as young people, as NGOs, we can make sure that as we are trying to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, at the same time, we are making sure that people's lives are safe by putting that component of increasing the adaptive capacity of certain communities and making sure that partnership stays at the center of all successful climate-related actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I think one of the strong points of your statement is about the community being at the center and looking at how the impacts are felt by communities and how everything has to be better integrated to support at the community level. I would like to now ask Lee to respond the same question. Lee, if you please.
Thank you. I just wanted to start by pointing out how resilience, like sustainability, has no singular definition or measure, and it means very different things to different people or to different disciplines. And generally, when we talk about resilience, we mean the ability of something or a system to bounce back to its original state after experiencing a shock, though we're increasingly seeing this definition shifting to be more about bouncing forward. So the ability to still grow, to still thrive, to actually use the disruption of a shock or stressor to actually improve on an existing status quo. So if we look at the concept of ecological resilience, it's not just about bouncing back to a degraded state, but really about restoring ecosystems. And similarly, looking at